wanted to play as an anthropomorphic woodland creature who is stranded in an isolated village because they were driven out of their home city due to a zombie plague? No? Just me? Well, regardless, if someone did have that oddly specific wish, then welcome to Grimshire. Hello, I'm Foxheart, purveyor of all things cozy, and welcome to my channel. And probably to no one's great surprise, I love cozy games, and Grimshire is currently one of my favorite games within the genre. And I wanted to talk about what makes it different and definitely worth playing with its darker undertones and more addictive gameplay. So, what exactly is Grimshire? Developed by Acute Owl Studios, it's often described as a grim, dark, cozy game. An apt description, I think, given you are brought into a small community by a traveling merchant who basically rescued you from a mysterious catastrophe in the capital city. The merchant warns the denizens that with the disaster in the capital city, he may not be able to provide the supplies they need, and so you are given ownership of an abandoned farm with the understanding that you'll help keep the food cellar of the village stocked, which you agree to, because you can't go home, so what else are you going to do? From the very beginning, Grimshire feels unlike most farming sims. You're not gifted the farm by a dead relative, or going to help a struggling village of your own accord, or looking for a simpler life from the one you previously led. No, you're literally dumped on the docks, told that you can't go home. And in that respect, it's more like survival games such as Ark or Valheim, rather than some of the other farming sims in the cozy game niche. Furthermore, you don't arrive alone. The merchant also rescued another fellow citizen from the capital, a lady goat who is grievously wounded and dies the day after. This sets the tone for the entire game. Despite the slice of life vibe you have with the villagers and the day-to-day tasks you do, there is a feeling of dread looming over the community, and as you're struggling to provide enough food for everyone to continue living. I'll go into more detail on the story of what I've played later on. But right now, let's talk about the graphics and the aesthetics. First of all, they're adorable. The pixel graphic style is such a perfect juxtaposition to the darkness that is a constant undercurrent of the game. Colors are muted but not muddy. It feels like I've stumbled across a faded storybook art, charming but lacking the bright colors of some of the other games in the same genre, which makes total sense given the context of the story. Now, this may come as a shock, but I love anthropomorphic characters. So I may be a little biased, but I am all for the woodland creatures as characters. It gives very Redwall, Rats of Nims, and Wind in the Willows, and a number of other stories where the main characters are cutesy woodland creatures. It also reminds me very much of a digital board game I used to play called Armello, which also deals with the plague. But the cutesy animals aren't just for aesthetics, but they do have gameplay reasons as well, since you have to make sure to keep enough food for both carnivores and herbivores to eat. There are also festivals that center around them being animals, such as the Shedding Festival, which first I thought it had something to do with putting up sheds, but no, they're actually shedding their winter coat. I don't mind anthropomorphic animals for the pure aesthetic reasons, obviously, but it also gives this an extra level of cool in my books when their animalistic natures are considered and featured in the story and gameplay. So let's go ahead and talk about the gameplay right now. Well, before that, let's look at my cute little fox house in game. I think it's adorable. But, okay, let's move on. First things first, character creation. You get to pick between 5 animal species at the moment. There are 2 carnivores, the fox and the stoat, 2 herbivores, the rabbit and the deer, and 1 omnivore, the bear. I do believe the developers plan on adding others down the road. And I think we can all guess which one I picked for my first playthrough. The fox, of course. Ain't she cute? The species is not only for looks. but each one gets their own unique advantage. And you also get to choose a profession, which gives you an additional advantage. And since foxes get the perk of fox in the henhouse, where bluggies are 30% more likely to lay extra eggs, I decided that the rancher profession would slot in nicely, giving my bluggies a higher chance to produce twins. More bluggies, more eggs. Okay, so what are bluggies? Well, in this game, we don't have the traditional farming animals. There are no cows, chickens, pigs, none of those kinds of things. I think because it would be kind of strange to have a rabbit or a deer slaughter a cow, especially if there are actual cow species in the world. So, the world itself has completely different animals, and they actually do different things, which is pretty cool. So, bluggies kind of look like fuzzy slugs, and they produce eggs. While you have chickies, which kind of look like lizard chickens, and they produce honey. There are ones that produce milk and even ones that grow mushrooms on their back instead of fur. Anyways, I think they're all very cute and adorable and very interesting on how it was chosen that the world would have completely different ranching animals than the ones we're used to in our world, and I think it's fantastic. So, tangent over, moving on. So it's a bit obvious that the main feature of this game is the farming. Not just farming crops, but fishing, foraging, and ranching. All of these emphasized through the story. I played on easy mode, which is recommended for a noob like me, and at least through my first blind playthrough, I struggled to keep the larder filled. Now, part of that is some of the events within the game itself, but even without them, it took me some time to get through my daily tasks and arrange proper time management, which I'm horrible at anyway, so perhaps that's just a skill issue on my end, in order for me to feel like I was providing enough food without constantly worrying if someone wasn't going to be able to eat. An example of how I treated this game differently from others is I normally don't bother with whatever the in-game irrigation system is until many hours within the gameplay itself. However, since it was such a time saver, I had to make it a priority to get that irrigation system up and running so I could maintain my crops and have enough time to fish because that is a major early game resource for carnivore food. In most other farming games, I've noticed that crops and foraging is more to do with maintaining your own character. Well, in this game, that is the gameplay. That is the important part because if you don't have those crops, if you don't have that food, people are going to die. Now, much of the farming, gathering, and animal raising is similar to other games in the genre, such as clearing land, watering, making animal feed, building barns, but the fact that the entire village is dependent on this food makes it very impactful. Now, there is no combat in this game, and there are no plans to add any. At first, I wasn't sure how I'd feel about this, but given I had enough stress gathering, farming, and fishing for food for the village, having to worry about getting attacked while in the forest or the mines would be far too stressful for me. And I feel the lack of combat allows the developers to provide just the right amount of tension between the cozy and the dark. There's also a basic skill system. Anything that has to do with gathering, farming, ranching builds experience, and once you fill your experience bar, you gain a skill point. There are 3 tiers of skills, and you spend the skill points on the first. You spend 1 skill point on the first tier, and you have to save up in order to spend skill points on the additional tiers. 2 for the second tier, 3 for the third tier. I believe there are 30 skill points that you can earn at this time in game, so you do have to decide where best to place them, offering the min-maxers out there something in this game as well. One feature I like is that you can spend points to gain the advantage from other professions. I like this because it does help build the character in a minor roleplay way. I started out as a rancher, But maybe I learned to love food, and now I'm a gourmet and get my perk for eating cooked food, or whatever your reasoning is. The last thing I want to touch on, and this will segue sort of into the story, are the decisions that you make in regards to the various troubles that the village is experiencing. You aren't told by the town mayor that the mill needs to be rebuilt and please supply X amount of stone and wood. No, you are given an option between two choices. Now it's framed as a town vote, but whatever side you vote on is the side that gains the support. To avoid spoilers, I'll just give an example of the first choice the player is faced with. In the first few days, two different projects are proposed to help the local healers. One is a mushroom hut, and the other is an herb garden, and you get to choose between the two. As of now, I only know that one decision you make has an impact later on in the game, and the other choices may also have that impact as well, or provide different gameplay as your playthrough goes on. But I will tell you that there are consequences for not getting those projects finished at the allotted time. I won't go into what those consequences are, but one of them did make me very sad. And these decisions, I feel, kind of prop up the story tied into the main narrative. And so let's go ahead and talk about story right now. Only the first year is available in early access. Also, very early game spoilers here, though I won't go into too much detail as I really do recommend you play the game yourself, especially if you've enjoyed other farming sim games. I mentioned the way the story throws you into the situation, where it feels very survivalish type game, but unlike those games, however, you aren't alone. You have an entire village that's trying to come together and support each other, including you, known as the farmer. This is obvious in the fact that you aren't left to fend for yourself, but given the basic tools you need, some money, and several other small items for your newly acquired farm. There's no bunching trees to make your first axe, but the main story arc that drives all this has to do with the attack on the capital city. The merchant who rescued you has left the town to find out what has happened, and when he returns, it is with some dire news. Something, we aren't quite sure what, but something has caused the animal folk in the capital city and the surrounding towns to go feral, very much like zombies or rabies, perhaps. The infected attack anyone, causing chaos and untold damage to the city and the land around it. On top of all that, anyone who gets bit succumbs to the same affliction. Now, there are towns who have managed to maintain their population, but they have built walls, posted guards, and turned away outsiders. And while the mayor of Grimshire has maintained that we are safe, it does feel like only a matter of time before things begin to get worse. Which is confirmed when a few days later a queen's envoy reaches the village and demands food and able bodies to help fight the afflicted. And this, of course, puts extra pressure on you to make sure that the food is now not only stocked for the villagers, but for the newly leveled defender's tax. And there are other several small events, I'll call them, that happened throughout the game that make it more difficult to gather foodstuffs. And while there's no concrete evidence as of now that these things are connected to the main event that's happening outside of Grimshire, you definitely get the sense that they could be eerily connected. As the end of the year approaches, the situation beyond the village gets progressively worse, and this is indicated by the change in the defender's tax. I won't go into too much detail as I don't want to spoil what happens at the end. And if you've played the full early access release, you'll know what I'm talking about, anyways. The villagers really do band together, though, and manage to make it through the rather disturbing thing that happens. Though I'm not going to lie, there were some parts that made me tear up during the preparations for the end of the year. And I think the game does a very excellent job at building up tension for what's about to happen. And I was legit worried for the characters involved. And while I haven't played to confirm this, but I do believe if there isn't enough supplies, you will lose villagers during this event. And really, it might be a tough act to follow, but the Grimshire dev team has proven themselves as competent storytellers. I feel I was allowed just enough time to breathe between the story beats, but not enough time really to get bored. And I'm not sure how I could handle it on a harder mode, but I am excited to see what the next years of Grimshire will give us. Now, with all that talk about story and villagers, I do want to go ahead and just talk a little bit about the characters. Because, as in most farming simulator games, you do have a cast of characters and villagers who you get to interact with. Now, unlike many farming sims within the genre, your fellow villagers can die, and not just due to starvation. Honestly, I feel this is probably where Grimshire could stand to see some improvement. I think they have a great built in emotional hook if they fleshed out their NPCs a little more. Just to be clear, there isn't anything really wrong with them, but I just didn't feel particularly drawn to one or another of them as far as becoming really close friends or romance, which I believe will be available later on in the game. But I think the framework is there to really give them meaningful relationships with the player character. Each one felt distinctive enough, and they even talked about their relationship with others in the village, which is always nice. I was particularly fond of the little romance between Prudence, a mouse, and Gruff, the badger. And when you speak with each of them, they do talk about each other, and you get hints of their feelings for one another, which is simply darling. So I do have faith that the NPC characters can be given more depth, and honestly, I am invested in making sure they at least stay alive. I just wish I had a little bit more reason to talk to them. I think I have rambled on long enough about Grimshire, so to wrap this up, I honestly can't wait to see what this game has in store for us, and I'm excited to hop back into the world. And not only because I plan to make a bunny character next, but also because I think many times people hear the word cozy and automatically assume it can't be dark or have depth or consequences. And yes, cozy is subjective, and perhaps that's a topic for another time. But Grimshire still had this comforting, though not exactly comfortable, vibe to it. And maintaining your farm and learning the different preservations of food is impactful. It made me want to keep playing. The pressure of keeping the food cellar stocked rarely felt overwhelming, but it did feel compelling. So, if it isn't quite obvious, I highly recommend this game, especially if you love the farming part of farming sims, or if you want a little survival element in your cozy game. And if you made it to the end with me on this deep dive into this amazing game, then thank you. If you feel so inclined, do all those YouTubey things, like the video, and tell me about your favorite cozy game below in the comments, or if you've played Grimshire and what you think about it. Also, if you want to see more Foxy content, make sure to subscribe. I plan to do more comfy cozy games like Fields of Mystria and Infinity Nikki. So, until then, stay warm and remember to always pet your bluggies.